What happens when a routine stop ends in tragedy? A man's last moments on this earth were captured on body cam. His pleas for mercy ignored, his life taken in seconds. This is what happened in the tragic death of Deacon Johnny Hollman. I'm Jerome Hill, and with me is retired Sheriff Victor Hill, and we're your hosts of Hill of Justice, produced by Jermaine Delma Studios.
Two brothers, sons of a Navy SEAL. Jerome Hill, a former Baltimore PD officer and narcotics detective. Victor Hill, the former sheriff of Clayton County and author of Vigilante Sheriff. Now, they've joined forces to break down the hottest topics in law enforcement and beyond on the Hill of Justice.
Brother, we have a very serious subject that ended in a tragedy, and you have something to show me.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's run the video. It's actually here in Atlanta where I'm at. So, and it happened with APD. So, let our viewers see it. And I know people here locally will recognize it, and then they'll get an idea of what we're about to discuss.
Okay.
Now you're going to sign this ticket, or I'm going to take you to jail. I suggest you sign the ticket. Sign the ticket.
Okay, I'm going to sign the ticket. I'm going to sign the ticket.
Sign the ticket. Sign the ticket.
How can I sign the ticket? You
Because you're acting crazy.
I'm not doing nothing.
Give me your arm.
I'm right here.
Give me your arm.
I'm right here.
Give me your arm.
My body already hurts, man.
Sign the ticket. It's on the ground.
I'm trying to sign it. What you doing like this? I ain't doing nothing. I ain't doing nothing, man. Why you hurt me like this, man? I'm on, man.
I'm not right away.
Sign the ticket. Let go of me. Put your ass behind your back. Put your ass behind your back down. Put your ass behind your back now.
Indisputable spoke directly with the daughter of this deacon. She was actually on the phone listening to her father die. As you can see, the deacon very much so said, I will sign the ticket during physical altercation from the cop.
Thoughts?
This is a rough one. First of all, my condolences to the family of Deacon Hollman. It's always tragic when you lose a loved one, no matter what the circumstances. And these are some very, very unique and stressful circumstances to lose a loved one under. I don't know if I've ever met him. He looks so familiar. I used to visit a lot of churches, and, it's always a joy to meet the deacons. They're usually a great group of guys. So again, before we discuss this and we discuss the good, the bad, the ugly, the first thing we want to do is just give our condolences to the family and let them know that, nothing can replace their loss. And we hope nothing we say here contributes to any further pain that they already have. Brother, I'm going to open up with saying this, and then I want to hear what you got to say. There's a lot going on here. I've always thought it was an asinine policy to lock up people if they don't sign a ticket. I've always felt that way. But I have to say this, they train a lot of police officers to do that. That's how I was trained throughout the years, that if a person doesn't sign a ticket, then you make them go to jail and post bond. The author of that policy, unknown, but I can tell you this. I don't know if it was well thought out, meaning that, okay, what happens if the person resists arrest when they decide not to sign a ticket? And, when a person resists arrest, anything can happen. Anything will happen. And, it's unfortunate, but a lot of police officers are trained to do that. And when they do it, things can go wrong. So, we got to be real careful about the orders we give our police officers, because that right there is the root of this problem. Perhaps if that policy wasn't in place, we wouldn't be here today. But officers are trained to do that. And I can remember being trained to do that. And I think you said when you worked for Baltimore PD, y'all were trained to write a second ticket for not complying and then lock them up on a second ticket. So in all fairness, we train officers to do things. And then when they do it, we lock them up for the results of it. So that's something that we got to put out there on the table. Another thing that's very unfortunate is we train officers to use a taser when people are resisting. But it's the luck of a draw. The deacon is an elderly man, but I have seen people much younger with heart conditions, and if they get tased, they can die. And so we give these officers tasers, and we ask them to use them. But if they just happen to tase a person whose heart can't stand it, then they could well be facing murder charges. And there are 3 deputies that are facing murder charges in Atlanta today for a case they were cleared of because they tased a man, and I think he died a couple of days later. So I just want to say we got to be very, very careful. We send these people out here to do a job, and then we give them policies, some that are not well thought out, that don't make sense. And then when they follow those policies, that happen. Now, I'm not saying I agree exactly with how this was handled, but that's 2 facts that we have to put on the table. I don't believe it was his intent to kill the deacon. And, murder, a lot of that charge has to do with the intent, that you have the intent to kill someone. Just like I don't believe those deputies that are charged with murder from Fulton County intended to kill that man. But unfortunately, you don't know who you're tasing. And even if they're young and strong and muscular, like I know of a guy that he didn't used to work for me, but he started working at the sheriff's office after I left. If you look at this guy, he looks strong as steel, but he had a weak heart. He couldn't even be tased during training. And fortunately, he died a young man because of that weak heart. So imagine if he got tased, even though he was a young person, a muscular person, he would have died as well too. So those are factors we need to look at before we delve into how this could have been handled better.
This officer did a lot of damage. And one of the things that strike me right away is that this deacon is 5'8", 244 pounds at 62 years of age. If your officers cannot go ahead and take care of somebody with soft hand techniques and get them into compliance, you do not need to be a police officer in any jurisdiction in the United States. Point blank. In addition, the guy told him, sign the ticket. Let me go ahead and explain this. Before you sign the ticket, what do you give the officer? Driver's license. You have his plate number. You have all of his information. He can't run nowhere. I did not see a combative individual. In fact, this was something that the officer should have easily been able to handle. But he didn't. He admitted. The guy was telling him, hey, guess what? I'm concerned that if I sign it, it would mean that I'm admitting guilt regarding the car accident. All the officer had to do was explain to him, this is not an admission of guilt. This is a promissory note that you'll come to court or pay the fine. He did none of that. You add to that, according to the police chief, under Atlanta's traffic SOP, which is the standard operating procedures, it says before it becomes a physical confrontation, you must call the superior or the supervisor, and they must be on site. And he goes on to say this. The reason why they have that standard operating policy there was to go ahead and take care of these type of reasons, which actually align with this case perfectly. It allows for a cooling down period. And all you can hear the officer do is keep stating to Deacon Hollman, sign the ticket, sign the ticket. So, of course, he's scared. He's a deacon. It matters not if he's a deacon or anything like that. Officer Kimbrough goes to arrest the deacon. And if we can, for a second, can we pull up the force continuum? Okay. So basically, the force continuum is something like this. It's a policy that tells officers or law enforcement how to escalate during certain scenarios and how to de-escalate from certain areas. So as you know, a police officer coming onto the scene, like myself, if I'm in uniform, your mere presence brings on that part right there. Your second part is, hey, guess what? Communication. You communicate with him. Then the next situation, if the officer understands that this guy is not responding to anything like that and he wants to be combative, then you use soft physical control techniques, pressure point techniques and so on and so forth. Then you escalate it from that point on. And then if he starts to assault you, you use hard physical control. The next tier, the second to the top, is when you start using your taser. These are alternatives to using your firearms. Now, my question to you is this. Did you see anything in that video? Anything that brought you to the point where you thought that you would have to use an alternative to a firearm?
Well, let me say this to be fair. Okay. I wouldn't have handled the situation that way. And I know you wouldn't have handled the situation that way. And I think probably the reason we wouldn't is because probably a lot has to do with our upbringing. I'm going to deal with elderly people a lot less differently when it comes to physical stuff than I am somebody younger and strong, just for respect out of age. I mean, we've had situations, I recall, where we actually had a barricaded suspect with a elderly lady that was 87 years old. She pulled out a gun and told my deputies to get out of her house. And I was proud of them because they just backed off. I was having it was a crazy situation. It was a warrant for her because she took a cane and hit another elderly lady in the head with it, and they went to serve the warrant. And so now we got a barricaded suspect. She has a gun. It was very interesting because I got into it with the SWAT commanders because they came up with all type of plans, and I was like, listen, that's not an option. The woman is 80-some years old. I think there's a better way for us to get out the house and then do that particular thing, which would probably result in her death anyway. And we were able to come up with a ruse, and she thought it was a maintenance man, and we locked her up, and it went that way. And a lot of that was respect for her age. Every situation is different. So we wouldn't handle it that way. We're at a certain different level or whatever. If you want to look at the use of force continuum, if you're going to look at it letter by letter, I don't know how much we can come at him with. He did have presence. He did say if this didn't happen, you're going to jail. He did put him under arrest. How he did it, I don't like it. You don't like it either. But we can't necessarily say he didn't go by those steps. We just think that those steps weren't necessary. He could have just backed off and said, I tell you what, come talk to the supervisor or whatever like that. This is a difficult one because it kind of reminds me of the Rashad Brooks case. A lot of people didn't like how that was handled. But we may not like how it's handled, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's illegal how it was handled. And that's the case where he beat up the two Atlanta officers, took their taser, turned around, pointed like a gun, and they shot. And a lot of people said, well, they didn't have to do that. And I think what they really meant is they wouldn't have done that. But how we train these officers, they're trained to do just that. Now, what is kind of hard to teach what is innate to a lot of different individuals like you and I it's hard to teach people what you would do or how you would respond or whatever like that. And that's something we've got to figure out how to solve. But I think the one thing that we can do is there's certain things that we just shouldn't put in a policy. We shouldn't put in a policy that if you don't sign a ticket, you go into jail. I think the best thing, and Atlanta did end up doing that the next day, years later, but too late. If you don't sign a ticket, that's fine. Just put refuse and let them go. Then we wouldn't be here.
Correct.
I think that's one way to solve. Kind of like no-knock search warrants.
Mm-hmm.
I stopped that at the sheriff's office years ago because it just doesn't make sense to make entry into a house unless you're going to rescue a hostage. There's this thing out there. If you don't get in the house fast enough, they may flush the drugs. Well, cut the water off. Mm-hmm. Well, they may get to their guns fast. I don't know of any SWAT person that can kick in the door and get in a gun and get into a house fast enough for someone to get a gun that's right there on their nightstand. So that's ridiculous. If we make entry into a house, it needs to be, we're risking a life to save a life. And a lot of officers have gotten hurt and killed that way. We just had a Clayton County officer injured, entering on a barricaded suspect. I hope he gets better soon. And of course, other people have lost their lives. There's some famous cases like that. And then it becomes this question, well, I didn't know they were the cops or whatever. Well, a lot of that can be avoided. If we're not rescuing a hostage, there's no real reason to have to make entry. You're rushing the situation. So I'm split on that because I wouldn't have handled it like that. You wouldn't have handled it like that. But we got to be very careful about the policies we put out to officers and how they interpret it and stuff like that, because not everyone is seized or not everyone has that ability. Do I like how it's handled? No. Would I've handled it differently? Absolutely, yes. But when you put out these type of crazy policies like that, hey, if they don't sign a ticket, take them to jail. When they decide to go with that and that person resists, anything can happen when a person resists arrest. And then you get a tragedy like this. You know what I'm saying?
Right. You only pull and use your taser if there's an active threat of safety. I didn't see one. Mm-hmm. Never on the elderly, never on the pregnant, or children, except
I agree with that.
Extremely rare life-threatening situations. That is it. You don't even do it on the non-compliant. I don't care if they're being annoying, arguing, or using verbal orders. That the taser is not that's not a taser-worthy offense.
I agree with you. Let me ask you a question though. Is that in every department's policy? Are they saying if a person resists arrest, step back and tase them because it's easier to do that way, or are they really putting those parameters in place?
That's because all I've seen. It could be different in other jurisdictions.
Yeah. Because I know
right now that is the bar right there.
Right. And we know about pregnant women and children and everything like that.
Right.
But a lot of these guys are being taught, okay, well, if they resist, don't fight. Go.
What
to
about
the
taser? Elderly?
I agree. That should be the case. Should be the case.
And then on top of it, so he's giving them those commands, right? He just basically told on himself. He puts his book down onto the truck and tells him, and grabs him by his arm. I'm going to let you know something right now, okay? Mm-hmm. If you use physical control first, okay, and if you're an officer and you start physical control, you better know how to finish it. That's one thing, okay?
And most of them don't.
Nothing won't be nothing. That's it. His refusal to comply with the resistance, was intentional or not. The result was confusing, and this put Officer Kimbrough. He put himself in that jackpot. Nobody else. Now,
well, let me tell you this. And here's another problem. He kept saying, he didn't say stop resist. He kept saying sign the ticket.
That's correct.
And now that's where there's a problem, because it's almost saying, okay, if you sign the ticket, we'll stop fighting. Or if you sign the ticket, you get what I'm saying?
Right.
During the whole fight, it was like, sign the ticket. So if they were on the ground and the deacon said, okay, I'll sign the ticket, it makes you wonder, would he say, okay, well, get up and sign the ticket? That's what that's where I was lost at right there.
Right.
Most of the time, when you see these situations, most of the time it's like, okay, well, you're under arrest. And most of the time, the majority of people comply with arrest. But of course, there's sometimes that people don't. And of course, how you get there we can avoid getting in some of these situations
Right.
if we clear up some of this stuff without creating these crazy policies that don't make any sense until it's too late, until you get the loss of life. Tickets are a very, very emotional thing. And, I didn't spend any time in traffic. Of course, on patrol, every now and then you write a ticket, and tickets are very, very emotional for people. And that's pretty much understandable. And sometimes it escalates or whatever like that. But I really think that I'm glad they changed that policy. I'm glad they won't put officers in that predicament again. I agree with you, everything you're saying. I think the elderly should not be tased. And here's one technique that a lot of people don't know about, or they rarely practice, and that's a disengage strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's where people it's when a person talks about resisting arrest or whatever like that, and you just kind of disengage, and you're like, okay, and then you call for backup, and you wait till backup to get there. That probably would have been the best thing to do there. And then at that particular point, maybe that sergeant, if he was level-headed, he could have reasoned with the deacon, like you said, and go forward from there.
Right. Well, another thing that put him in the jackpot too, and to be fair, this is an hour-long struggle. Okay, an hour-long video. I got to see the whole entire video. Deacon Hollman, for about 13 or 15 times, he tells him, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, as the officer is straddling him, physically on top of him.
Mm-hmm.
The struggle stops after he tases him, okay, because he takes the taser and he threatens him a couple times. He shoots it off, bzz, bzz, and then after that time, he tases him. So the struggle stops after he tases him, and there's a good Samaritan that comes to assist the officer. Deacon Hollman was already unresponsive by that time. So the officer, to his credit, calls for a supervisor at that time and asks Grady to start making their way over, which is, I guess, your version of EMS.
Right.
He checks his pulse multiple times, and he says he's passed out. And then he claims he's still breathing. This guy's in distress.
Right.
They didn't get there fast enough. Okay. He took it too nonchalant, So Deacon Hollman didn't die because he was a threat. He died because the system chose protocol over people.
Yes.
A lack of training over compassion.
Absolutely.
And an officer who lacked all types of common sense.
Yeah.
This was a common sense arrest.
I think you just hit the nail on the head. And I was trying to figure out a way how to articulate this. Okay. There's policy and then there's common sense. So, you can follow the policy to the letter, but sometimes the policy doesn't make sense, and you got to realize, and sometimes it gets political, of course, depending on who's going to determine whatever. But I think that's what you're talking about there. Again, all situations are different, and elderly people, you got to be very, very careful because they're very fragile. Now, I'm not saying at the same time you can't get injured or hurt by an elderly person. We've seen that happen. And I'm not saying that you can't defend yourself, but you got to look at the situation and, okay, what's this arrest about? I mean, did he just kill someone? Of course not. It's just over a traffic accident. He didn't agree with the ticket. Exactly. So is it worth it? Was it even worth the paperwork?
Right.
To take him to jail for that. I know I certainly wouldn't have been interested in that. I would have been more interested in catching a robber or something like that.
Was the arresting officer within his legal authority to arrest Deacon Hollman? Absolutely. He was in legal authority. That gets back to, is this a murder? A little bit what you were talking about.
Right.
Murder is intent.
Right.
You're stretching it with manslaughter now. And I think that the attorneys who is advising the family is doing them a disservice. And I'll tell you why. The medical examiner labeled this as a homicide, and you know all about this. Mm-hmm. Homicide is such a vague and broad term. So you can have somebody be killed. It's just the killing of one person to another. But you can have somebody killed in that and be justified in that sense. Murder, we're talking about a whole different story. We're talking about intent. And so when the medical examiner rules that the deacon's death is a homicide, and this is so broad in that way, it brings and invites legal problems. And this is where the family can get all caught up. And I would be mad too if I was our dad.
Absolutely. They've got every right.
Right.
And can you imagine a story that she was listening to it?
Yeah.
Let me say this. The one good thing that's come out of this is the family did get a wrongful death settlement. They got over $3 million. I don't know if you can put a price tag on somebody's life, but I'm glad that the city settled with them. Who can put value on a life? But I'm glad that the city did that. I'm glad the policy has changed. Let me say this. And even though this guy did what he was trained to do, I can understand where the city is coming from as well, because you just said something. You said common sense. There were some people that used to work for me that I did not want working for me because they didn't have good common sense. And how they interpreted things was not the way I wanted particular circumstances handled. So I think that's what the city of Atlanta is saying. And I don't think they're saying he can't be a cop again. They're saying he can't be a cop again here, because those are not the type of officers we want. Maybe somewhere in this is a learning lesson for him. And if he's given a second chance in law enforcement, he could become he would look at situations different and handle it differently, perhaps. But I understand exactly where they're coming from at the same time. I don't think it would be probably wise for him to patrol that particular area again anyway.
No.
I don't think it would be good for him. He thinks it may be good, but it probably
Who would want to
wouldn't.
hire him if he can't handle
I know.
himself?
Exactly.
Who the fuck wants to hire that piece of shit? Huh? If you can't handle yourself, get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
Especially a 62-year-old man. You know how you stop this nonsense? When officers start carrying their own insurance. Now they have skin in the game. Just like a doctor with multiple malpractice claims, you'll see the premiums rise. Do that to police officers. I bet you don't stop bullshit like that.
They don't pay these officers enough to have their own insurance.
It doesn't have to be.
Pay exactly, but you know good and well, and I do believe that they should have insurance. And I believe if we decide to ever go back in that's something we should look into. But the average police officer makes barely enough money to help himself. At the end of the day, there's a lot of things I've figured out. I've figured out how to control jails. I've figured out how to stop drugs in communities. I have yet to figure out how to hire people and put common sense of how I think things should be handled or no things should be handled. If we can figure that out, we'll be rich beyond our measures. And the only thing I was able to do is there were certain people, like we've had that discussion in one of our shows before. I used to fire people and hand out suspensions like the Easter Bunny hand out candy. I just don't think they're good common sense. I can remember having an employee that threw a woman's coat in the trash can because she told her she couldn't bring a coat into the jail to visit an inmate. And when she came back out, her coat was in the trash can. She was fired. And I don't know what her thought process was on that, but that's not the type of person I want to work with for me. How do you get that into people's heads? I don't know. But I agree with you on everything. It's a very, very tragic situation.
I could tell you right now what's going to keep on happening, this type of stuff. And right now, what police departments are doing, they're going into defense mode because it's obvious. They know that the officer is wrong. But why do they got to go into defense mode? Because they're trying to protect themselves from lawsuits. And that is what is sickening. And that's why people are upset. And that's why when they keep on seeing videos like this, they're going to continue to keep on going ham. So this, I understand this is a high liability profession, but something has to be done, bar none.
It is, but I tell you this, here's one thing that can be done. Do I have all the answers? No, but I can tell you this. Those type of asinine policies, do away with it. Then that way we don't put officers with or without sense in those predicaments, so we don't even get there. Because there's certain things not even worth it. It's not worth it that, okay, a person, he refuses to sign, so he goes to jail. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, fair enough. All right. I want to thank you all for tuning in. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like, and we really want to hear your comments about this show. I think that this is one of those shows that a lot of people have, skin in the game with this. So we'll make every effort to respond to each and every one of you that we can. This is The Hill of Justice, produced by Jermaine Delma Studios. Until next time.